How do I know if my data is actually dirty or clean? What do people mean by unclean data? The most simple answer is you just look. Humans are actually really great at pattern recognition, and we talk all this about machine learning and artificial intelligence. At the core, we still have human intelligence to rely on. And so we can take a look at data visually and say, are there duplicates, missing values, outliers, things that just look wrong based on your domain expertise? And from there, we can go and talk to the correct contacts in the broader data engineering organization and figure out what's going on, or we just remove those rows. So once we detect the dirty data, we can eliminate them altogether when they're irredeemably wrong. We can fill them in with new data when we actually can impute or merge in the correct data set. We can treat them as meaningful. Maybe what we're trying to do is actually identify cases where the process broke down, and when the data looks a little bit funky, we can actually say that some process broke down and actually a row of garbled data is somehow meaningful to us. And most of all, talking to people, figuring out someone who knows more, and asking them what they've done in the past. To take a look at an example of data where we can profile and see whether it's clean or not, we can take a look at this promotional leases data set. Here we can take a look and see age. We see that the age distribution looks relatively straightforward, meaningfully distributed between 20 and 80. That kind of makes sense. We can go ahead and grab the next column and say, take a look at the marriage column. If we show all labels, we see that marriage is mostly married, mostly single, or widower. But we have this small number of rows, about 6, where master's degree may have been incorrectly coded, or we had some formatting issue with the data set where the comma-separated values weren't separated correctly, and these slipped in. This is something that we'd want to go and look at explicitly and say, hey, like, what are these rows? Does it make sense? And when we slip this in, we see that the master's degree don't actually correspond to the next column. These are probably some data rows that maybe had wrong manual entry and we can delete. We can go ahead and also profile across the entire data set, and we should do this on almost every exercise, and say, let's take a look at all of the variables and make sure that the range of values all make sense. So for instance, for age, we were earlier saying that it made sense. We actually see that there is some observation where the age was 159. Probably would want to check that out. With credit score, we see that the distribution is also, again, mostly in the upper range between 300 and 800, but we have a small number of rows that maybe are miscoded. A lot of these miscoded rows might actually come from the same row of data in the originating data set because the row of data was just messed up, and we actually don't lose that many observations. But by knowing that credit scores typically fall between 300 and 850, only with that domain expertise does it become actually extraordinarily simple to say that credit scores below 50 are nonsensical. We see that within dealer ID, maybe there is one row that didn't have a dealer labeled. That's probably acceptable. We see that the top values for education level make sense. We see that incentive falls between 100 and 2,000, which again makes some sense to us. And we can go down the line and say whether these various variables are distributed according to our expectation. The most important thing is looking at the data. The more time you spend looking at the data, the more likely it is you'll detect some of these outliers like zeros, or you'll detect some nulls and zeros that don't belong either. So for instance, if I sort by the number of null rows, I can see that there are some folks who didn't get an incentive. In this case, with my context knowledge, I think that that actually means it's 0, and I can go ahead and address that by filling in 0 for those values as well.